Some of the investigators began to call on the scientific community for facts which might put the puzzle together and prove or disprove the reports. Here is Dr. Charles Guiguet, curator of mammals at the Provincial Museum in Victoria, British Columbia, who reflects the dilemma in which he and his companions found themselves.
In my opinion, the Sasquatch, the Yeti, the abominable snowman, the Winnebago, the Cadabrosaurus, Loch Ness Monster, Ogopogo, all of these animals belong in the realm of folklore and mythology. And my reason for saying this is simply that there is no concrete proof, evidence, that any of these creatures ever existed on the face of this planet. No one has ever produced a specimen, complete or incomplete, to prove that any of these animals have ever lived.
Yeah, I mean, talk about physical evidence you might have found, while in the field.
Obviously footprints, and remember with footprints, very seldom did you ever find a good line of them because you wouldn't expect that because Bigfoots are, there's a lot of data pointing to that. When they come to cross a road, they're not just crossing the road. Mm-hmm. They're gonna look, and if they see a whole thing of mud, they're gonna go around it. They're really smart at not wanting to leave any sign or indicator. There was a report that I had received. So every morning he'd get up around 4:30, he'd hit his coffee maker on, and he just lived in a real, kind of a nice single, but it was real nice property. And he had a big hill behind him. And he goes in right, and if you looked out his back window, there were 2 apple trees, always blooming with fruit. And then he had the old barn there with the barn light. And he said, one morning I'm sitting there, getting ready to go for work. I had my coffee maker on, always had the lights off, and he'd just be looking out because the light from the barn light would illuminate the tree a little bit, and he could watch the deer. And he says, one morning I'm sitting there, he's thinking, wow, what's that on the ground there? He could see like a form there on the ground. He thought it was like a deer laying down. He says, all of a sudden it stood up. And when it stood up, he saw it was this small kind of bipedal walking thing. It started walking back and forth, and he's there with his jaw hanging. And he said, all of a sudden, here comes in the picture, the big one. The big one walks into view. They were picking apples. He goes, I see the big one go that way toward the barn light. And he says, when it walked into the kind of the woods, its shoulders were so wide, it caused all the branching in the weeds to push away, and the light came through. And he goes, I'm watching this with my jaw hanging, and then he sees the little one run after it, follow it right in. So I got the report. So I decided, I'm looking at this big hill behind there. I'm thinking, well, so I saw a game trail going down. So it went down and it meandered down on the edge of the woods, got into that open grassy field that was where the 2 creatures were seen walking into. Mm-hmm. This is no joke. So I'm looking down like this. There's probably about a 6 foot, 7 foot by about 3 foot area of grass. Looked like something took like a board and just patted it down like this. Then there was a little connector, about 11 foot by 6 foot. And guess where the other trail went to? Right to the edge of the corner to where the apple trees were. So they made these little temporary little beds, and at nighttime they would come down, get food, and come back because they're so good at manipulating or taking advantage of things.
The argument from skeptics is we don't have a fossil record of Sasquatch. What do you say when people bring that up? Or you could say fossil record, you could say, why don't we have a body?
Well, the body's an easy one to explain because anything that's walking on 2 legs has a larger brain. A larger brain means higher intelligence, and obviously most Bigfoot reports that I know of always include more than 1 creature. You help your own. And I remember talking with Jane Goodall at Case when she would come and speak there, and we were talking about Sasquatch, and I asked Jane, I said, what do you think about the dead Bigfoots? And she goes, well, I've seen in gorillas where we'll know one is sick and dying, but 99% of the time we would never find the body. We couldn't figure out why. And then finally one day one of her trackers says something's going on. All the vultures are way up in this tree. So he climbed up in the tree, and the gorilla, even though it was on its deathbed, managed to climb up the tree, went into a crotch, and died in peace up there. And so, and think of that. So the thing's dying, but they still weren't able to find him only one time. So she thinks that because they're social, more than anything, they're either A, eating their dead, because if there's a competitive clan of them, a big victory is eating someone's dead. So that's why chimps will try to eat each other's, of an opposing clan. So I'm thinking that they either eat their dead or maybe they do bury them. Why? I mean, they can't waste calories for one, and two, they have to, they're going to do something. They're not going to let anything harm it. These things are families. When there's one, there's a group of them. And also, like with fossils, remember Napier, Dr. John Napier. Yeah. Read in his books, he always talked about the collection in the Smithsonian going so deep below the building that he said there's probably bones that are Bigfoots or Gigantopithecus that are just totally in these messed up boxes that it would take kids or future scientists years to go through and classify. They probably already have them.
The Earth keeps a record of the life it has hosted. From bones and tusks to tiny shells, trails and footprints, leaves and tree trunks and spores, fossils tell a silent story of things that once were. In many cases, fossils provide the only clue to the appearance of different life forms, from which the human imagination extrapolates a description. Fossils also serve the purpose of helping identify specific layers of rock, even when separated by miles of ocean or glacial debris. But on the simplest level, fossils are evidence, tangible proof that something occupied a particular place. For those curious about the past, their value is obvious, and yet the record the Earth keeps is vastly incomplete, with some estimates suggesting that 99% of all species that lived on Earth have gone unpreserved.
My name's David Wickham, and I have a nickname for some of my friends, Taters. I'm a licensed physical therapist. I've been practicing therapy for 30 years now. During the day, I work in a clinic where I help people who have had injuries or surgeries rehab back to their highest functional self. And that kind of relates into some of the reasons why I'm into Bigfooting. I grew up in Guernsey County, grew up near Salt Fork, and we always heard the history or notoriety of Bigfoot at Salt Fork. I remember having, an argument with my dad when I was a kid about Don Keating having a Bigfoot conference in New Cumberstown and wanting to go, and my dad kind of like, there ain't no Bigfoot, we don't need to be doing that. But I grew up in my junior prom was at Salt Fork, and I remember going through the park saying, wow, it's crazy here, you know. Now that I've grown up and I have opportunity to seriously jump into the rabbit hole and look for Bigfoot, Salt Fork is one of those meccas for history, if not current investigations. I think sometimes some people have said correctly that it's overfished. There's a lot of people running around doing yells and hitting trees, but there are still some back roads areas that are deep in the woods that you have to backpack down to and get stuck and bleed a little bit and get a little muddy. And if you can just have a little bit of patience, spare time, you can, I think you can find some things still happening down there. If we're looking at Bigfoot being a living, breathing creature, it's gonna have the necessary needs for shelter, food, water. There's going to be a time where they're going to be gathering food, or they want to be by a really strong food source. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes the encroachment of man pushes them in certain directions. And I don't think they're confrontational unless you back them up in a corner. If they have a access to vacate or back off, they will. But one of the things I believe is their characteristic is that they're curious. And if you make yourself either entertaining or curious, they're going to stick around a little bit just to see what you're up to, what you're all about. So as a researcher, an investigator, an enthusiast, I used to want to define myself as one rather than a whole bunch of those things. You got to have an open mind and try different ideas. Put you in a situation where you can have a chance to collect the data or information and then share it. I think some people are very stingy about their research or their findings, and they want to keep it all for themselves, for their fame, for their fortune.
If we're looking at this from the standpoint, let's say, of the fossil record, it would be extremely easy to remain undetected. And I say that because scientists themselves estimate that 1% of all living creatures are represented in the fossil record, which is to say that just because something does not appear as a fossil doesn't mean that it didn't exist. So there are lots of unrepresented creatures that we know are real that you will never find a fossil of. So looking at the issue from that standpoint, it wouldn't take much at all to go undetected. If we're thinking of that in terms of a live specimen, it's sort of central to the Sasquatch question, is how could something like that survive down to the present day? And it would take extraordinary evasive capabilities on the part of that species. It would have to take areas where they could remain undetected for large periods of time, and they would have to procreate. They would have to have food sources that would be sustainable for them. So a lot of odds, it would seem, that would stack against that situation as, you know, being plausible, although that's those who forward the relic hominoid hypothesis are suggesting just that.
Just because they're big doesn't mean they can't hide, and I think they've had, over time, the evolutionary adaptations to fit into these environments. Like, you know, they're definitely got, you know, the hair thicker for colder months and things like that. They got the downward facing nostrils, which I feel like was an adaptation so they could actually breathe in colder air instead of what they were used to originally in more like an Asian climate, you know. And I think everything's just adapted, including their feet. Like, you know, you hear about the mid-tarsal breaks, and I've seen that. I think that allows them to go up and down these treacherous areas that we can't do by shifting all the weight to different points of the body. And I think it's the same thing. I do believe they knuckle walk at points, and I think that's why some people's tracks just disappeared. Well, if you're following tracks and all of a sudden it drops to 4 points and you're putting the weight out evenly, distributing it all in 4 points, it's going to be lighter on tracks and things. And especially, we don't know if the mid-tarsal breaks like an L, and when they drop down, you could only be finding the front part of a footprint. So that's one of those things we don't know anything about. It's just an assumption. But I think there's not that many in number, and I think they know not to come near us most of the time. I mean, when it comes to us, every time they see us, we got a hand cannon shooting at something out in the middle of nowhere. So I think they just know better than to come near us, you know. So I think they just stay away, and they literally, and the other thing is, I don't think they need to like live in caves and things like that. Like, I actually think we probably walk by them 100 times and you'll never know they're there. I mean, if you took something like that and it just crawled under a pine tree that had some slightly overhanging boughs, it's going to be so broken up, you'd be walking right around chatting, listening to earbuds, whatever, never even know that they're there. And I think they do that a lot more than people think. I think they just, you know, wait till you go by and then do whatever they're going to do. So
I think, and I've described this as Bigfoot or Sasquatch becomes one with the environment, where we've shaped our environment, we've created houses, air conditioning and everything else to suit our needs. These animals are able to survive in their environment, and if you look through history, anything that is more aggressive gets killed off, so the gene line becomes, the aggressiveness is breeded out of them so that they learn to stay away, that they know that humans aren't a bad thing, but on the other hand, their curiosity is what we use to try to bring them to us and have different things with that. So I would think that part of those different things play within looking for Bigfoot or Sasquatch and investigating it.
Well, I would think it would have to live in an area where few people ever venture. Maybe the topography would be such that it was physically impossible for humans to get down into it. They'd have to be quiet and not let people, hear their presence. But it could probably be done, because there are some places, not just in Ohio, but other states that are virtually inaccessible to humans. There are certain areas that would just almost be totally impossible for humans to get down into, and if they did get down into, they'd have to climb their way back out of there.
Since the fossilization process favors marine organisms, that leaves a small percentage of mammals that are discoverable. In other words, it's relatively rare for any land-based vertebrate animal to become fossilized. This fact has a rather straightforward application for those with an interest in species that are yet to be classified, a grouping into which the Sasquatch would comfortably.
What do you think it would take for any prehistoric species, hominid or otherwise, to remain undetected in North America?
Personally, I think about something like the Cross River gorilla. They say there's probably 200 to 300 left in the wild. They're on the border of Cameroon and Nigeria over in Africa, and for a long time they were thought to be cryptids because couldn't find the bodies, couldn't find them get them on camera trap, anything like that. When I think about them, I feel if Bigfoot is a living, breathing, mating creature like we are, I don't think there's that many of them. We have a lot of farmland, we have a lot of forests, so it's not that they couldn't be here. But again, even I find it hard to think in Ohio that they could be like so many of them. Like you look at the black bear population in Ohio, and especially around here, there's sightings. We see them, but there's not that many of them. I think Bigfoot would have to be even fewer to be able to stay undetected. Just my personal opinion.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be: does Ohio present the type of environment where they could feasibly live?
I don't think most people think that. I remember having several conversations with Peter Byrne, and he was like, "You're crazy. There's no Bigfoot past, a certain line in the United States." But I think he's wrong. I'm sorry, Peter, I love you. But I think that we do have the possibility of them being here, not just because I want them to be. I legitimately think that they could be. And I think most days, like I said, I think they are. If there's not that many of them. Again, that's just from what I've studied from people who are way smarter than me. I've talked to them about that, scientists, biologists. You have to have a sustainable or viable breeding population. So you have to have like a certain number of them, but I just strongly feel there would have been even more sightings. On the flip side of that though, there's way more sightings than people know. I mean, we have different databases that are public. There are so many other sightings that are not public that I think a lot of people wouldn't even believe. So, I don't know. My thoughts go back and forth a bit.
There's so much in North America that is just, nobody's set foot on it. Millions of acres and state, national forests and things like that. So one of the reasons why we have as many sightings in Ohio as opposed to some other states, I think, though, is because our blocks of forest are, there's one here, there's one here, there's one here, one there, and sometimes the only way to get from here to there is a road crossing. And so I think that there's so many sightings in Ohio is because they have to go where people are to get to the next section. Unlike other places, out west that just have 1 million acres and they'll never be seen by a human. How are they still remaining hidden, here in Ohio, with a lot of our development? I mean, yes, we have a lot of rural areas. People don't pay attention. Everyone's on their phone. People don't go, a quarter mile off the trail. They just, and these things are so stealth. I mean, they could be standing right next to you. You don't even know it.
If you're going to live in the woods, you're going to have a good idea of what's out there to live on. Animals need 3 things to exist: food, water, and shelter. And as far as I'm concerned, the Sasquatch is an animal until somebody proves me otherwise. I've had reports turned into me where this thing has allegedly taken a 5 or 6 foot step, quickly, not dawdling around. If you're walking through the woods and you can take a 4, 5, 6 foot step in the woods, you're not gonna be around for long. So you're gonna be able to get to different areas where the natural resources are available for you to exist on. If you look at the United States west of the plains, there's not much out there. The Rocky Mountains, the Continental Divide, there's a lot of nothing out there until you get all the way up to the Pacific Northwest and then to the Sierra Nevadas. So, I mean, it would be believable that there are a bunch of them that live out in that part of the country and into southern Canada. John Green mentioned on the on the Morning Exchange back in January of 1989, between where he lived in Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia, Canada, to the Arctic Circle, which is a long way, there were 4 roads, and that's it. So when you've got that vast nothing for this thing to live on, there's not much of a question at all as to how it can exist. You know, it just does what any animal has to live in the woods.
You know, when we're looking at Bigfoot, the 2 big things that people would say right offhand that Bigfoot would maybe be something from a prehistoric time or an earlier time. You know, whatever it is, it had to come from Asia, right? Because the Bering Land Bridge was about 20,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. Man and all other things came across that. So Paranthropus, which has been found in Africa, some people believe that it's essentially a Bigfoot but smaller. But there's problems with that because we haven't seen any evidence that they were along the pathway. We don't have any fossils or anything like that. Most people will point to Gigantopithecus. You know, we have a grocery bag full of bones, a lot of speculation that whether it was on 4 legs or 2 legs, but you know, the newest research looks like could be something similar to a Bigfoot type thing. Its last found was around 100,000 years ago, which is next to nothing from an anthropology point of view. Or probably the more likely thing is it wouldn't be exactly one of those 2, but it would be in that line or in that chain. So whatever it was, it existed with modern humans, hunt, seen them kill animals, has learned to be leery of humans, learned how humans act. And so when it came across the land bridge with humans, modern humans, it probably set up accordingly, unlike how it did with bears and learning how to exist in an area with a large predator like that, or a large mammal.
They've been found in all 88 counties and are even present in the walls of the State House in Columbus. It may come as a surprise to learn that Ohio contains world-famous fossil deposits in each quadrant of the state, consisting of shale, limestone, and silica. Perhaps most fascinating are the Ice Age deposits, which have yielded fossils of mastodons, mammoths, and short-faced bear. These deposits are typically in low areas such as glacial lakes and peat bogs, and their fossils suggest species living today in cooler, more northerly climates. The size of these specimens cannot help but seize the attention of the investigator looking for large living creatures in Ohio's forested areas.
Does Ohio present the type of environment that would be necessary for them to remain undetected?
So everything across the land bridge, you know, one of the things that's most intriguing about it, of course, on average, when you look at the size of the prints that have been cast, they're a little larger the farther you go north. That seems consistent with some of the models that we see in biology. In addition, the most sightings are those 3 states out there closest to the land bridge. Then, of course, whatever Bigfoot would have been across the land bridge, and then like all the other animals, it spread, chasing territory, game, and everything else, and dispersed through the United States. Washington, Oregon, California with the most reports. Then somewhere out of nowhere you have Ohio. And part of Ohio having so many reports is just a perfect storm, so to speak, of the land, the water, enough hills, enough places to hide, and a lot of food. Probably Ohio may be as big as anywhere in the whole country culturally for Bigfoot. Bigfoot events, Bigfoot festivals.
Based on reports that you've heard, does there seem to be knowledge on the part of the park officials regarding Sasquatch activity and or an effort to cover it up?
Well, I know with Woodbury here, it's really not it's a dead subject. The park rangers don't really even give you 2 cents about it. But over at Salt Fork, Bigfoot hikes that the naturalist puts on is well attended. In fact, if you're gonna go with pure attendance, he can go do a nature hike for bird songs or bird watching. You might have a few people show up, but then if you have a Bigfoot hike, you can have 30, 40 to even 100 people show up. And so I think the interest is there. The history of Salt Fork through the ages for all the different researchers like Don Keating, other people that's been there, it's kind of established itself as the Ohio's home base starter for Bigfoot research. They've had a long history of it. Most of the park rangers, they know it. They take the reports from people in the park that have sightings, and then sometimes they share that with reputable researchers that they bump into and have them investigate. It's all good for tourism. Ideally, when you have a topic like Bigfoot that's free for the park, they don't have to pay Bigfoot any money or royalties, and you get people traveling all over to stay overnight, to go out in the woods with a flashlight and do a couple tree knocks, and whoops, you've made a fan for life. And then, you know, the different conferences that have popped up. 10 years ago, there was far and few between. In Ohio, the Salt Fork one was one of the better ones to ever go to, and now they're all over the place. And people are kind of cashing in on that. And that's good and bad, because it puts the topic out there, and then people will feel a little bit more freer to discuss the topic of Bigfoot. But it also can mean it can be with AI and other computer systems, they can game the system a little bit and create fake footage, and that hurts the researcher in the long run.
Does Ohio present the type of environment that would allow that to occur?
I think it does. Ohio does present that habitat to occur, but in very limited quantities. The head scratcher about Ohio as a location is that, you know, we're not an Alaska by any stretch of the imagination. We're not even a Olympic Peninsula or a Smoky Mountains. Our range would be very minuscule compared to that. So that's a challenge. What that does set up is the idea of a small mobile population of beings that wouldn't stay in any one place for a long period of time. I think also what's interesting, again, returning to the fossil record for a moment, you wouldn't necessarily think of Ohio as being a fertile fossil state, but it really is. Actually, down in the Southwest in particular, there is a robust record of marine life down in the Cincinnati area. In fact, it's world famous for those who are interested in fossil records. Blow our minds to see walking around Ohio, but evidently in the past it was able to support that size of creature. So it begs the question, why not now? I think the intrusion of man into just about every corner of the state helps explain why not now. But from a purely ecological standpoint, maybe Ohio.
My name is Tina Sams. I'm from Liberty Township, which is in Trumbull County, Ohio. We are at my campground in Columbiana County, which is about 40 minutes from my home. I have been camping here off and on permanently for the last almost 24 years. So my sighting was back in 2016, and I have been camping at this campground on and off for about 24 years. We had new owners the year before that. So the new owners allowed us to have golf carts, which we were never allowed to have, and also opened up all these trails up here that we can bring our golf carts up here and whatever. So the weekend that it happened was Memorial Day weekend. That was the weekend she opened the trails to us. So I had lots and lots of guests that whole weekend. So we briefly came up here, I mean very briefly, for like 5 minutes one time during the day, and that was the only time I had personally been up in these trails. So later that evening, once my camp cleared out and the people that weren't spending the night went home, I was left with one of my girlfriends and a 15-year-old female friend of my son's. So I said to them, hey, you guys, now that everybody's gone, you guys want to go up and check out the trails, whatever. Probably 2 hours before that, I had seen some headlights coming down the trail, so I knew people had been up here. So we all jump on the cart. We come down the middle. At that time, it was a cornfield, but it was early in the year, so there really wasn't any corn. So we came up in the middle of the field, turned down here to these trails, and about 3 times we stopped, shut the golf cart down, listened, looked around to see if we heard any. To be honest with you, we were looking for other golf carts or to see if anybody else was up here. So the 3rd time we stopped was right in this location where my golf cart is parked right now. So when we stopped, we were all looking to our right into the deeper woods over there, kind of looking for headlights or whatever. And as we were probably there at least a minute, maybe a little bit longer, and as we're all looking to the right, we hear a twig snap on our left. I grew up hunting and fishing. I know that what that sound means, and something had to have stepped on it. So we hear the twig snap. We all snap our heads around to the left. The girl that was in the passenger seat was blocked by me. The little girl, well, not little, 15-year-old girl on the back, and me at the same time turn our heads. And what we seen was something was on the ground, and it pushed up almost like a track person with one arm, stood up into a standing position and started walking away from us in that direction. So immediate chaos ensued, immediate. Like as soon as whatever that was stood up, the young girl in the back started screaming, "What is that? What is that?" The girl next to me, because we're all, blah, 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 she was like, what? So there was like a lot of chaos. And I like to tell this part of the story because a lot of people always say, why aren't there any good pictures? Why aren't there, videos? When that happened and whatever that was stood up in those woods, my golf cart inadvertently was moving. I did not have a thought, let me get out of here, my body was just retreat. And like I said, there was a lot of chaos, and the little girl in the back was screaming, "What is that? Go, go, go." So we're already moving. I take off. So it was probably, I seen it 2, 3, 4, 5 as we're pulling away, walking away from us.
Seconds?
Yes, 5 seconds, yeah. Walking away from us. I didn't see a face. I didn't see big details. I know 100% it stood up onto 2 legs and started walking. And I would say it was about 2 or 3 shades darker than maybe the Carhartts that people wear that, I could see a little bit of color. So we take off, and when we take off with all the adrenaline pumping, I pass the only trail that I know how to get out of these woods. So we're tearing through the woods as fast as the golf cart will move. And we come out into this field, which at the time was a soybean field. And we were on an upgrade, and ironically, the camp was over the other end of the hill. So when I stopped in that field, I was stopping because I needed to get my bearings. I didn't know where we were, which way we had to go to get back to our campsites. And the reason I'm telling that part is because I remember when I stopped in the field and I looked around a little bit, I looked behind me to see, and the 15-year-old in the back, literally her veins like this, and spit coming out of her mouth. And she was like, just go, don't stop, like freaking out. So I kind of took off, ultimately found our way back to her spot, which was closer than mine. So we get there, and everybody is pretty much losing our minds. And I think her parents got mad at me because I think, they know I like Bigfoot, and I think they thought, I don't know, I was playing a trick on her. I would probably do that to my own child. I would not do that to somebody else's child. So we just dropped her off, and there wasn't a lot of conversation. And I kind of felt bad because she didn't even get to, they just kind of shut her down. So we drove back to my lot, and there was a fire across the lake. And I didn't really know these people, but I thought, let me go ask them if maybe that was them up in the woods or whatever. They were drinking. The conversation didn't go well. I went back to my camp. The owner's son was one of the people at that fire. So he leaves them and comes to my site. And he's like, we were not up there. I haven't seen anybody. Tell me what happened. I tell him. He said, let's go back up here. So he jumped on his cart. Me and my friend jumped on my cart. And when I tell you, my adrenaline was pumping so hard that I could feel and hear my heartbeat in my own head. But I thought to myself, you're going to be so mad at yourself if you don't go back up there. And if you get a shot of the ground here, you can see, especially where it happened, it's very leaf covered. We didn't find anything ultimately. So I did come back up the next morning when it was light, and I still didn't see anything. So people would ask me how big, and I would always say, I don't know, human size. I think it was human size. So I came up here all the time for the next 3 months. The whole summer, I spent the whole summer up riding around in these trails in these woods. One time my niece was with me, Alexis, and she says she's 5'11 and a half, but I'm going to say she's probably like 6'1 or 6'2. So we were on the golf cart, and we just happened to be on this trail, and I said, you know what? I'm going to stop, just jump out of the golf cart, walk towards that tree, because then when people ask me, did I get a size comparison, I have something to tell them. So I stop, she jumps out of the cart, walks around the front of the cart. She doesn't even get 5 feet from me, and I thought I was going to throw up. It was, in fact, not human-sized, and you know, not. It shook me. I wasn't scared up here until I had her do that, and then I was like, okay, it's bigger than human-sized. And then I'm going to keep it real. I lied to people for a year and a half. I could not come back up here. Like, I would tell people I didn't have gas or my golf cart was broke, and so it shook me for a long time.
Does what we know about Bigfoot cross-correlate with what we know about some of these prehistoric species?
I think it's possible to cross-correlate between what we know of prehistoric species and Sasquatch, but we have to openly acknowledge what we have to work with, which is not a whole lot, unfortunately. In the case of Gigantopithecus blackie, what do we have to work with? We have teeth and jawbones. And from that, what we're dealing with in terms of describing a species is the work of, admittedly, very learned, highly educated people who are then taking the teeth and by their size and the jawbones by the angle at which they're situated to extrapolate from that what they project to be the size of the creature and everything else about it based on teeth and jaws. That's not to say that's not possible, but we have to realize that that's what, if we're making the comparison to Gigantopithecus, that's what we're working with. Based on then cross-correlating that with what exactly do we know about Sasquatch? What can we prove about Sasquatch? It's precious little, unfortunately. Trying to cross-correlate, what we're really doing is a very highly educated speculation or guess, as it were, with a creature that we're not even 100% sure exists at all. So coming to conclusions about how are they the same is notoriously difficult. Now, we can do some things. Gigantopithecus blackie, if it was indeed, and it seems to be reasonable to say, that it lived in Asia. Asian apes do have straighter spines than other creatures do. And that's important because a straight spine lends itself to bipedal locomotion. You have to have a straight spine in order to walk on 2 feet. And so we can say, based on that at least, that these animals could walk on their hind legs and sometimes may have preferred to do so. Main Sasquatch reports that are given, it's almost taken as a matter of course that they're going to be walking on 2 feet. Although you'll always get some in which it appears that they go down on all fours and can move about, almost doing like a crab walk or something of that nature. So that's the limitation, unfortunately, of trying to cross-correlate is less than I think we would prefer to have. The physical description of Sasquatch is inescapably hominid. Centuries of accumulated reports tell of erect, bipedal, hair-covered beings that blur the line between ape and human. Given the scarcity of evidence at hand, it's still worth considering what clues hominid fossils might communicate about the nature of other mystery primates, some of which may still stalk the woods of North America.
It could be that some of these creatures are Gigantopithecus, but what do you do about the ones that don't look like apes or monkeys? Because every sketch or illustration I've seen of Gigantopithecus, that's what it looks like, is a gigantic prehistoric ape. But we've taken numerous reports of people seeing what they call Bigfoot, and the creature did not look anything at all like an ape or a gorilla. It looked like the Geico caveman or a Neanderthal man.
We have an abundance of food. Even like I think winter months they're tough with deer and things. And obviously just a theory, but like, you know, like primates like gorillas and things they chew through bamboo, and you know, because of the way their jaw muscles are. I'm assuming these things can eat things very dense also. And my one thing is I always thought in wintertime when food's scarce, one of the sources might be something as simple as a pine cone. They could sit and eat as many of them as they want. It's full of pine nuts. you know, so it is a form of protein, and I'm sure they could chew it, you know, but I think it's just an abundance of food. We have stuff here that they can get pretty much year round, and our winters haven't been ridiculously cold in a long time. We haven't had any real major freezes that like have killed fish off around here or anything, so I think that's pretty much just everything is open and available.
To hear about Gigantopithecus, and maybe it's a descendant of them, or maybe they're still around. You hear about the Neanderthal, and maybe they have something to do with it. Honestly, I feel that maybe it's something totally different and unto its own, because there's a lot of differences between those two creatures as well. Although Gigantopithecus, what we just have the teeth to, right? So we don't know as much as maybe we think we know about those creatures.
One thing, we have abundant water, lots of rainfall. Most places in Ohio have over 42 inches a year, which is needed for any animal like this to survive. So with everything else and the reforestation of Ohio in comparison to the beginning of the 20th century, only about 8% of Ohio was forested. And what we've seen since that point in time, less use of wood for fuel and things like that. We've also seen the smaller farmers and the family farms fail, and those lands have become fallow and then grown back into trees and forests. The creation of the state parks and done that. So right about now, Ohio has about 33% forested lands in this. So within that, we're creating a greater habitat. When I was growing up, you never saw deer, you never saw anything. We're having bear come back to Ohio. There's approximately 150 resident bears in Ohio. I know at Salt Fork there's 3 right now. In the valley by me, whenever one of them's seen there, it hits the news like it's like amazing thing. So we've created that. The less use of pesticides and all that. We've seen eagles repopulate, so why not Bigfoot?
The further east you go in Ohio, the more heavily wooded it becomes, because you're getting to the foothills of the Alleghenies and the Appalachian Mountains. If you go just over to Columbiana County, to northern Jefferson County, to southern Mahoning County, there are some densely forested areas over there. Didn't do the research with the gentleman, but I went to his property because he was recording sounds that were unusual in Columbiana County. And the road to get to his house, you would think you were driving in the mountains, because it was that heavily forested, and it was quite a hill to get to his place. So yeah, the areas in Ohio, if you take a map and you draw from, say, Youngstown over toward Worcester to I-71 down to Columbus, and then down US Route 23 down to Scioto County where Portsmouth is located, take that area and just go southeast, I would consider that to be prime territory in Ohio for Sasquatch to exist. You've got the Wayne National Forest, which is tens of thousands of acres. You've got Salt Fork State Park. You've got all these parks, all these lakes that were man-made back in the 60s and 70s. They're out there for anybody or anything to roam. Ohio has how many deer that are harvested every year? How many complete deer skeletons have you discovered lying on the forest floor in Ohio? Very few. And the reason being is because you have opportunistic carnivores like coyotes that come along and they feed off the dead carcass. You also have a little critter in Ohio that probably very few people know about that is a calcium feeder. It'll dispose of the bones. It's called a deer mouse. They'll eat a lot of bone in no time at all. Ohio's soil is also very acidic, high acid content. So what the carnivores don't take care of, nature will dispose of itself in no time at all.
What would it take for any prehistoric species, hominid or otherwise, to remain undetected in North America?
I would say it would be very difficult, but I think it's possible. Whatever it could be, I do think they have ways of hiding and not being seen, and especially when the leaves and foliage are all full.
The notion of Bigfoot as a missing link in the evolutionary chain is one that has been advanced as a speculative hypothesis at various times. Science, however, moves with the evidence, and new discoveries have introduced greater complexity to the family tree, as it were. Where does that leave the concept of Sasquatch as a relic prehistoric species?
Every few years now, we're getting proof that there were other similar lines of humanoids or hominids growing up parallel. You had the Homo sapiens, which are us, the Neanderthal, the Denisovans, the hobbits, and so forth and so on. So who's to say that there isn't something else that we don't know that's in the fossil record we just haven't found yet?
I really see that there are two main ones, two main difficulties with the relic hominoid hypothesis. The first, interestingly enough, was admitted by Jeff Meldrum himself. He was the recipient of an award pushing the edges of science out into places that they don't normally go. And in accepting that award, he gave a really marvelous speech that can be found online. In that, he talks about the great difficulty of someone who is bringing a relic hominoid hypothesis to the scientific community. What he has run into, and what the individual who would bring that hypothesis runs into, is an anthropological and scientific establishment that in many ways is still dominated by the single species hypothesis of evolution, which says, the name itself indicates, that evolution happened, one species becoming another species, becoming another species. And so there's no place in that line to put a relic hominoid, because you're saying, by bringing the relic hominoid hypothesis forward, that there were other hominoids outside of that line. Even now, when there's ever-growing, an exponentially growing set of data showing that there were other hominoids that existed, the so-called hobbits being one of them, with a more fully developed skeleton even, being able to show that. When someone comes with a relic hominoid hypothesis and they're vetted by their peers, they're even published in credentialed works, what happens when they're reviewed is that the information that everyone can agree on, that's what's commented on. And then the researcher who says, hey, don't you think this might open the door to a relic hominoid hypothesis? Doesn't that open the door to that? That's not even treated. It's ignored in many of those reviews. And so that's one of the difficulties, is the institution, science as an institution itself, does not seem to have a mechanism for receiving that as a possibility, which is very strange. And that is where Professor Meldrum and others have really put themselves out there to the degree that they're risking their reputation and their tenure and their position as a professor simply by asking the question, could the evidence that we have not suggest, instead of one singular line, branches of a bush? Because look at all the data that's out there that shows hominoids existed here and here and here, and we can date that down to a very relatively recent time, as recently as 10,000 years ago in some cases. So he expressed frustration at that, certainly, but also a hopefulness that at some point the dam has to break. The data itself, if scientists are going to be scientific, that they look at the data and say, it's hitting us in the face that there were other hominoids at the same time existing in all these multiple places. So that's one difficulty with the relic hominoid.
We don't know how long these things have been sighted around, the country. I've heard that the earliest report was 986 AD when Leif Erikson and his men came to the New World. Erikson kept a journal, and he wrote in there about encountering these gigantic creatures that smelled terrible when they screamed, and I think they called them Skelring, which translates into barbarian. But we really don't know what these things are. I mean, people have different ideas. Is it a prehistoric ape, or is it some sort of a caveman thing? So maybe we've got some of each.
When I think about that kind of thing, I'm relying heavily on their knowledge. I am a teacher, but I'm not a science teacher. So when I talk to my friends who are anthropologists, we have a few in our group, and they think that it's possible, then I guess I think that it's possible, but can I give you a lot more information than that? No.
The only way I would call it prehistoric is the fact that it may have been around for tens of thousands of years. In the caves in China, they've discovered hundreds, if not thousands, of teeth, and they've also discovered partial or complete jaw structures of a very large, apparently upright walking primate. And a lot of people think that that could be a relative of, if not directly related to, the Sasquatch. They have estimated that the animal that left those teeth and jaws behind were possibly 9 or 10 feet tall.
Does what we know about Bigfoot cross-correlate with some of the stuff we know about prehistoric species that you're aware of?
In some cases, yeah. Not necessarily maybe prehistoric species, but some prehistoric man. Because the description of these things run the gambit, whether it's gorilla-like or chimp-like or man-like. You know, and some people describe it as a wild, feral person-looking. Maybe in that aspect, probably, yeah. Proving the link to the ones that did exist, probably. I think that would be the hardest thing. I mean, everybody talks about giant, you know what I'm trying to say. But I don't know. I mean, because that's, it. Like I said, most of the ones that you talk to people about and hear about don't seem to fit that actual description. Some are bigger, but you know, they just don't seem to fit it.
We're always learning, right? Because we used to think that we had this line of how humans developed, and it went from, you know, Homo erectus to this to that to Neanderthal, and eventually we get over to humans. And just in the last couple decades, all that's changed. And now we realize that it was really just like a bush, and all those people lived there, and they interbred, they hunted, they killed each other, and eventually Homo was the one that came out of it because Homo had the larger brain. So we're always learning about what Bigfoot would be or what something like that would look like. And you know, unfortunately, we just don't know everything about even humans and where we came from, let alone where Bigfoot would be. So there's always a lot of speculation about what that would look like. The problem is that every other existing species has been found, meaning that even if some weird fish pop, you know, we most of the time knew that it exists. And so how could something that is relatively large compared to everything else exist aside and with humans and been able to find enough food without, you know, someone accidentally finding a dead body at some point, saying, no matter how many good points and how much evidence you put out there, eventually they'll say, why don't we have a body? And most of us are prepared for that and have a good answer for all that type of stuff. But there's troubles for that. You know, why don't we have a body? How they exist through the winter? Why aren't there more tracks found in the snow? You know, I think a lot of that is just the scarcity of the animal, and people discount that.
To bring the relic hominoid hypothesis forward, by definition, is a limitation of what we're looking at. It is a scientific, materialistic look at the data that exists. And as such, and I say this with all due respect, there are pre-hypothesis decisions being made about what we are going to examine and what we're not. What that means is anything that smacks of the spiritual, anything that smacks of the supernatural is not going to be considered at all as part of the hypothesis because it doesn't fit with the scientific materialistic worldview. To which I would say, as someone with a degree in theology, which is not nearly in vogue as a scientific degree would be, but what I would say is that there are other worldviews that do allow for some interpretation of that data that science says, I'm not going to even examine that at all. I don't have a mechanism for examining that. Those from other disciplines can look at those in other ways. And I'm also thinking here of indigenous ideas about what Sasquatch and Bigfoot are. And those are commented on always in scientific studies, but they tend to be very quickly moved past in favor of the materialistic viewpoint. And so all that I'm saying is, with other disciplines that can be applied to the same question, why not open up all the channels to see what the data is saying? And until we get that type specimen, why not explore across different ways of thinking about what constitutes evidence or proof? I see no problem in having all those channels wide open and seeing what they might say to us.
It could be very ancient, but it's just a being that has these abilities that we don't possess maybe yet, but it could be actually very ancient and be here before we were. You know what I mean? It's possible that people have discussed that it's actually from another solar system or another planet.
What do you think about that?
I think it's possible. I mean, what's Chewbacca? Right? So I don't know. It's a cool idea.
It's up for debate. I mean, it depends on what you want to believe, I guess, really. I mean, like, you know, Grover Krantz had talked about them being attached at the base of the skull, you know, would make them walk upright. People argue that fact, but I don't think it has to be that anyway. I think it's, like I said, I think it's adapted to everything it needs to adapt to. When you look at the descriptions of it, it does match up pretty well, other than they say it's more like the Gigantohead was more an orangutan. But I mean, like I said, if it adapted, I could see that coming from it being bipedal, but walking as a quadruped when need be. I think it shares well, the weird thing is it shares a lot of the same food sources and habitat as bears too. So I figure, you know, you kind of have to just assume that it's evolved along to fit, like I said, it's just that environment, you know.
So then you're of the opinion that, like you said, it's evolved. It's not like a snapshot of gigantic.
No, I don't think, in fact, you know, like there's some people say that like a true hominid, you know, like something like Homo ergaster or Neanderthal, something like that, but I don't think it is. I actually just think it is a primate. I think it's only unknown to us because we never looked for it. There's so many reports from, you know, Native Americans and things that suggest it's been here just as long as we have. So I think that's all it is. It's just a species that evolved probably from something like Giganto and is now something unique upon its own. But like I said, I also kind of concerned that they're quickly going to go extinct, you know.
The fossil record indicates that large mammals once roamed Ohio, such as the giant ground sloth, of which an extremely rare complete skeleton was discovered in Holmes County in the 1890s. However, no equivalent hominid specimen has been obtained from the state's terrain. What will be uncovered in the future remains to be seen. Everything could change with one turn of the shovel. Until then, researchers will have to be satisfied with the knowledge that Ohio has supported large life forms in the distant past, and if eyewitnesses are to be believed, still does in the form of Buckeye Bigfoot.
Well, I guess I got a little bit of woodberry and a little bit of salt fork here, but these are things that I usually use when I've done kind of support the Bigfoot hikes over at Salt Fork, or you go to Boy Scout troop meetings and you got to share information. I like to have something that's tangible that the kids or the people can look at and understand there's more than just to say I saw a Bigfoot. Going into the books and stuff like that, I've gotten a few things off of Don Keating, or when you do the research, all these little tabs is something I had to deal with Ohio or Coshocton County. We stand on shoulders of giants, and sometimes you look at that, it's already been, you don't have to reinvent something. It's already been documented. So I use that as a background of what I'm seeing and does it relate. One of the prints that I got was up in Woodbury near the hunters camp near Tunnel Hill, and there's actually 5 4-foot prints that I got, and I was able to cast 2 of them. It was 2017, and it was off County Road 58. It was something an area that I've had lots of luck in getting footprints, and sometimes I see something and I cast it just because you can always look at it later, and if it's nothing, then it's nothing, but if you don't collect the evidence, it won't be there by the time you get back. I did something kind of funny. My friend Big Kevin, he's 6'8", and he weighs about 375. Wonderful guy, wonderful family. But he's the biggest guy I know that I can actually say, sit here, take off your shoe, put it in this plaster. So the white is the footprint that I got off of Woodbury, and the light blue right here is Big Kevin's foot. And again, he's 6'8", 375 pounds at this time. You can see a little bit of a difference. One is kind of like Shaquille O'Neal's. One time took off his shoes, him and Charles Barkley. And the thing we have is even Shaq has a small heel. It had a arch area. And then his toes, even though they were gnarly, his toes showed that they had been in shoes for all his life. And so when we're looking at something that doesn't wear shoes, we're talking about his toes is going to be out and flailed out. And we saw that in almost every instance where people have worn shoes, whereas some of the native or aborigines who don't wear shoes, you'll see their toes flailed out, and they can use their toes for other things other than just walking. Climbing, and they use it for when they're producing products. Their feet are dexterous, and we've lost that when we've put our feet in shoes all the time. So, but I always thought that was an interesting conversation with that. With Don, you're looking at anecdotes and stories of what happens in Woodbury, learn from the people who've done it before and find similarities and patterns. Does it still jive, or does it support what you're finding in the field? With Salt Fork, this is another area besides having Woodbury in my backyard that I enjoy working with. And the other thing I say is find people that you love to hang out with and trust and have the same mindset. Mike and Shane from Woodbury, we go out and we have a ball. We pick on each other and poke fun, but when it's we find something that could be evidence, it's all real serious, and we have a good time supporting each other. This here is a footprint. When I was in the BFRO, I got a call to go down. They had a witness that had just seen a Sasquatch standing on the side of the road. I went there since I live close, about 45 minutes away, and if you could see the footprint, I kind of put a rope around it just for some simplicity. But here's the big toe. Other toes down through here, goes down through, and there's the heel, and there's a mid-tarsal break right here. And this was in very compact, off the edge of the road debris. So whatever made this definitely was pretty heavy, because it dunked into the silt pretty deep. But it's in a report that I did and submitted. This is something that was given to me, or at least I was shared this, and I, with permission from John Hickenbaum, I took this from Salt Fork. This was up in a tree near Morgan's Knob. It was about 8 foot up in a tree, and it was hanging down like this. It was near the path, and if you look through, this tree has been twisted a little bit more than 360 degrees. And so what I did is got some linseed oil to try to preserve it. Hopefully one day we'll be able to put it in a place where other people can take the idea of a possibility of it maybe being a twist. This was found by Jack and Becky Warren, and I always want to give them credit for allowing me to harvest this and use this to share with people that I get to talk in front of. Last one is a large footprint that I no longer have or don't have. I casted it. It was at a Bigfoot camp out over at the group camp in Salt Fork. We had a big, I remember the year was, they had a hurricane come through, and we had to deal with lots of rain. And this was down over on the Buckeye Trail, and we actually found 2 footprints, and I only had enough casting material for one, but this was huge. This is like a 22, 23 inch footprint, and it was easy to find the pathway because there were trees bent, small trees, a little bit bigger than the thumb, almost bigger than my wrist, were just bent. They were kind of rebounding back. You could see where this went through the woods. It didn't follow a path, it made a path. Still trying to find out who has this, because at the time that I casted this, I was low on the totem pole and had to volunteer it to greater goods, and I don't know where it's at right now, but it's something that I'd like to get a hold of one of these days again.